Bill took a look at the past. I'm going to take a look at the future in a lot of my slides. I'm going to show you a lot of charts today that I think you'll find very interesting. But let's go to the first chart right away. This is a chart of proof fossil fuel reserves worldwide. And you notice there's a lot of countries in the Middle East here. Saudi Arabia's in there, Russia's in there, even China's in there. So where would the United States fall in this? This is something not too many people know. Let's go to the next slide. The United States has more proved fossil fuel reserves than any country in the world. We are an energy superpower. The problem is that we have a disco-era energy policy that is indifferent to, if not actually actively hostile to America's energy abundance. And that's something we'd like to see change. Let's go to the next slide. You've all heard about the American energy revolution that's going on today, and it couldn't come at a better time because what we're seeing is significant changes in the world. When you look at forecasts of where people think the biggest increase in energy demand is going to come from, it's not going to come from the West. It's not going to come from the developed countries. It's going to come from the developing countries, countries like China and India, the Middle East, Southeast Asia. These are areas that traditionally are not energy-producing areas, but they are getting to become big energy-consuming regions. And when you're dealing with something like crude oil or natural gas or coal, where resources are finite, or at least, excuse me, Bill, the supply the supply is tight in many of these markets. Well, the fact that we have all this energy abundance in the United States gives us a geopolitical advantage that I think we need to take advantage of. Let's go to the next slide. So, when the Chamber did produce this document, Energy Works for Us, this is our most recent policy document. I'm not going to go through all 64 recommendations in here. But when we did this document, this was really an update of a document we did back in 2008. And one of the things we had to take a look at was how has the world changed since 2008, and what are the implications for policy? And so one of the analytical tools we used to do that is to see where the Energy Information Administration, which is the statistical arm of the Department of Energy, where they were forecasting things back in 2008 when we did our original policy document, and where they're forecasting things today. So I'm less interested in where things were back in 2005 and where they are today. I'm interested in where we thought that what we thought the future would look like back then compared to what we think the future will look like today. I think this gives you a much clearer picture of really the revolution that's ongoing now in the American energy sector. So here I'm going to show you a number of slides that have two projections. A projection back from 2008, which I think in this is the red line, so that's from the Annual Energy Outlook 2008, and the blue line is the Annual Energy Outlook from EIA's most recent model run. So this would be the 2014 model run, the early release. And we'll take a look at dry natural gas production. You can see back in 2008 that we anticipated going out to 2030 that natural gas production in the U.S. would be flat. We now anticipate a significant increase in natural gas production up to close to 35 trillion cubic feet a year. That's a significant increase. And this is the shale gale that people have been talking about. Just about all this increase is coming from unconventional gas production. Let's go to the next slide. So what does this mean? What are some of the implications of this? Well, we've heard about the U.S. becoming an exporter of liquefied natural gas. Back in 2008, we anticipated that the U.S. would continue to be a large and actually an increasing importer of natural gas into the United States. That's not the case anymore. You can see from that blue line, these are net natural gas imports. So any line below zero is we become a net exporter then. The EIA now predicts that by 2017, 2018, the U.S. is going to be a net exporter of natural gas. And when you get out to 2030 or so, we're going to be a significant net exporter of natural gas. You've all heard about the LNG facilities that have to get approval from the Department of Energy. There have been 5 that have been approved, which amount to about 10% of U.S. natural gas production. But this gives you an indication of how the application of 3 technologies, hydraulic fracturing, horizontal drilling, and advanced seismic imaging, have really changed the game and reversed what was a declining picture for natural gas in the United States into one where we're now going to be a natural gas exporter. The The changes that this has wrought, Mark will talk about some of the employment aspects and some of the economic aspects, but the changes this had to the economy are still being felt and will be felt for the next decade or two. Let's go over to the next slide. Okay, we did the same thing with crude oil production. Drilling for natural gas is great, but really where the money is these days is in drilling for liquids. So if you look at the red line at the bottom, that was our forecast, EIA's forecast in 2008 of where we thought crude oil production would be going out to 2030. And you can see it's essentially flat, and so we're around 2025, it starts dipping down to 2030, right? Take a look at the blue line. The blue line is what EIA now projects our crude oil production will be in the United States. And quite frankly, I think this is low. I think we could actually go much higher. They top off at about 9.5 million barrels a day. We don't think there's any reason why the U.S. couldn't produce 11 to 12 million barrels a day. And when you start producing 11 to 12 million barrels a day, you're in Saudi Arabia territory then. And you really do start having an impact on the world price of oil at that time. And just to give you an example of that, in 2012, about 700,000 barrels a day of Iranian crude oil was held from world markets because of the sanctions put on Iran. During 2012, Canada and the United States combined increased their crude oil production by about 1.1 million barrels a day. So more than enough to offset the lost Iranian oil to world crude oil markets. What that means is less volatility in markets and downward pressure on prices. So this is a very important and significant event that's going on here. Let's go to the next slide. So when we think about crude oil imports, it's been mentioned that the concern about crude oil imports has been a perennial one going back at least 40 years, certainly since the Arab oil embargo. And what this chart shows is the blue line. It shows the forecast I just showed you for domestic crude oil production. And the red line is the forecast, the current forecast for U.S. crude oil imports. And really what this amounts to by 2020, the EIA is projecting that we'll be importing about 4 million barrels a day less in crude oil than it was projecting back in 2008. So this is a significant change. It's impacting our balance of trade in ways we haven't imagined. And now we're actually having a conversation about whether to export crude oil or not. And the reason we're having that conversation, quite frankly, is because the type of crude oil that we produce in the United States is the good stuff. It's sweet and it's light. The problem is that our big refining center on the Gulf Coast in Texas and Louisiana operates on crude oil that is heavy and sour. So really what we're going to see in the next few years is a glut of sweet light crude oil in the United States. Our refineries on the Gulf Coast don't want it, and our refineries on the East and West Coast that do want it are going to be satisfied with production up to a certain point. And then the question becomes, well, what do you do with the excess? And the logical thing to do at that point is to export it. But this is going to be an educational process that's going to have to go on, I would suspect, for a number of years. But this is something that the Chamber, the American Petroleum Institute, and other organizations are involved. It's important that we educate not only the public, but the policymakers as to why exporting crude oil and natural gas is a good thing. We'll go to the next slide. Okay, so we had IHS CERA do an analysis for us on some of the economic impacts. Marx will talk more about this, so I'll just touch on this very briefly. But just by 2035, we expect that the unconventional oil and gas is going to be responsible for about 3.9 million new jobs. Disposable income could be increased for the average family by about $3,500. Revenue, $1.6 trillion in additional revenue going to the government. I mean, it's probably not too far-fetched to say that fracking could be the savior of the welfare state. Investment, we're looking at $284 billion in additional investment in 2012. And we'll add 3.2% to the value of all U.S. goods and services. So this is a huge game changer. It's really the only bright spot in the U.S. economy at this point and it's all because of unconventional activity in oil and natural gas. And the benefits are spread out throughout the United States. You don't have to be an oil and gas producer to realize the benefits of the unconventional oil and gas revolution. So this map just gives you an idea of some of the states that are benefiting from this. And what's interesting, if you look at the top 10 non-producing states down here, California is one. New York is another one. They don't allow fracking in New York yet. New York is one of the biggest beneficiaries of the unconventional oil and gas revolution. I can make this available, so I think you can see the colors a little better when you get a hard copy. But the point of this is that everybody is benefiting from this, and you don't have to be an oil and gas producing state to be benefiting. It's happening across the country. Let's go to the next slide. Bill mentioned this is true. It's hard to imagine this unconventional oil and gas revolution occurring on federal land. It's all occurred on state and private land. And when you look at the forecasts, EIA is forecasting the same thing. All the increase in natural gas and crude oil is coming on state and private lands. None is coming on federal lands. What this chart just shows is that while we're having a shale gale in state and private lands, unfortunately on federal lands, oil and gas production is in the doldrums. Go to the next slide. And this is one of the reasons why. About 80% of federal lands are off-limits to oil and gas production. There's a lot of shale on the federal lands, but if you don't have access to it and you can't characterize it and you don't know what's there, then you can't produce it. And the same thing goes with our offshore areas. About 80% again are being held off limits. So if we really, really wanted to energize this revolution even further, the way to do it is by expanding access to federal onshore and offshore lands. Let's go to the next slide. So let's look at coal. EIA was projecting back in 2008 that we'd be seeing an increase in coal production. We're actually going to see, we're now projecting that we're going to see pretty much a leveling off in coal production. Two reasons for this. One is cheap gas. Cheap natural gas from shale. It's putting a lot of pressure on the coal industry, but I think even a bigger impact is the Environmental Protection Agency and the regulations that it's imposing on coal. It's not too strong to say that the EPA would like to banish king coal from the realm, and they're doing a pretty effective job of it up to this point. So we can go to the next slide. This just goes to show, this chart just shows you where some of the closures are coming from in coal facilities. We're going to be losing about 60 gigawatts. EIA now estimates it's about 20% of the entire coal fleet, which represents about 10% of all U.S. generation. This is a pretty significant hit. And I would just remind everybody, during the coal snap, everybody says, well, we can easily switch over from coal to natural gas. Natural gas is great. But there's something comforting about a utility executive looking outside the window and seeing a pile of coal, because you can't look out a window and see a pile of gas. And during the recent coal snap, one company in particular had to restart about 80% of its coal-fired power plants that it had slated for closing because of the EPA rules. Had to refire those plants to meet increased demand. Natural gas wasn't going to do it. Renewables weren't going to do it. He had to start up. They had to start up their coal-fired power plants. So the coal-fired power plants are an anchor within the grid. We feel they're completely necessary, and you can't have a modern electricity system without coal. It's as simple as that. Let's go to the next slide. And not only that, the rest of the world's not getting off coal. The International Energy Agency projects that by 2017 or so, coal is going to supplant petroleum as the largest energy source in the world. The rest of the world has no compunction about using coal. We shouldn't either. And I'm finish off with a couple of slides on the competitive advantage that cheap energy gives us in the United States from coal, from natural gas, and increasingly now from oil. These are natural gas prices for industry. In 2011, that's the most recent data for the International Energy Agency. And you can't see it all that well, but here's Canada and here's the U.S. here. Our natural gas prices are anywhere from 2 to 4 times lower than they are in our OECD competitor countries. Go to the next slide. And this is electricity prices for industry, also from the International Energy Agency. Same story here. You see on the left-hand side, the United States and Canada. And you can see, I don't know what's going on with Italy, very high in Italy, but for the most part, our prices are anywhere from 2 to 4 times cheaper than they are in these other OECD countries. This is a huge, huge competitive advantage, especially if you're running an energy-intensive industry. And it's no wonder that a lot of European companies are looking to either expand production capacity in the United States or build new production capacity in the United States because of the the competitive advantage cheap energy gives us. And go to the next one. So energy works for us. I talked about this. You're going to hit the next slide. These are the 9 planks in our energy policy document. I won't go into any detail on any one of these, but we really have to do something about increasing access for oil and gas, coal. We have to maintain coal as part of the energy mix. We have to resolve some problems with our nuclear system. Renewables are part of the mix, but we have to make them more competitive. Energy efficiency is certainly something that we support. And we're taking a look at emerging issues like cybersecurity. A perennial issue has been getting enough students in science, technology, and engineering degrees so that we can design and build the energy systems of the future. And so these are the 9 areas that we talk about in the report in great detail. And if you give us the last slide, this is the advertisement. This is where you can go get more energy more information about the document, energyxxi.org. And this Better Energy Future is a fairly new coalition. We have now over 100 groups that are involved in this, and this is something this is a group that's taking a look at the EPA regulations of greenhouse gas emissions. It's not just about coal these days. I think a lot of other industries are realizing now that they're on the EPA's list too. And so this is a coalition that we put together to make sure that business's voice is a loud one in the discussions over EPA regulations as they go forward. And with that, I will stop.